Thanks everybody who is joining us for our second ever office hours event. The first one we had a couple weeks ago with our finance folks at ICI. And so today we thought we'd open the floor for those who had questions for Alkarim or myself. But before we got there, I thought, Al, I wonder for the folks who hadn't been to middle school before, maybe just provide an overview of middle and some of the service offerings that we have.
Sure, yeah. I can see some of the names here, so it looks like most of you have attended, and so I'll try to keep it fairly brief, elevator pitch. But Dar and I have been in real estate for over 15 years, and I've kind of been building a multitude of different types of products throughout, mostly within established areas redevelopment, but really had a focus on kind of low density redevelopment, helped with the inception of the actual row house district here in the city of Calgary. And over the last, I would say 12 months, Dar and I have been talking about like, how do you actually scale middle housing? Because each opportunity actually starts with someone who owns a parcel, a piece of land, and is exploring what the next phase or life of that potential home could be. And so, you know, in my history, I've worked on over, I think, 500, close to 500 units, acquiring these one site at a time, and realized that every time we buy a site, generally it's because there's a family circumstance that has occurred or something has changed in any way. So came to the conclusion that to solve middle housing, even though, you know, you require a team of different experts, the real opportunity lies with the land. And as land has become more and more scarce within established neighborhoods, we created Middle to figure out how to actually help people through the redevelopment process. So whether if you own land or exploring what it could be like for you to purchase a site and potentially live in that, then a redevelopment process, or rent those out, is kind of what we created Middle. And then, you know, we've now hosted 2 middle schools. Some of you have attended. And the entire concept of Middle is how do we make sure we're providing full transparency around the actual process, because there was no school for me when I was getting into this, or for Darlene. Like, you know, Darlene has her master's in planning. I went to business school, but everything that we've been through, like, we never had people to teach us those mistakes. And so we kind of created middle school to walk people through the process, understand what the constraints are, and figure out how we can help close the gap for those venturing to do this on their own. And so Middle now is working in several municipalities across the country, helping provide more certainty for the middle housing spectrum. We're working with the federal government as well through CMHC on how to actually streamline the process in different cities. And so lots of good stuff happening, and really excited about building out this community and supporting folks on their middle housing journey.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Al. The only thing I'll add to that intro is, as part of the work that we're doing with municipalities, is we're creating, well, first off, we're reviewing the policy and connecting with industry members to see what is the most conducive for market accepted middle housing designs. And as part of that scope of work, we've been doing a lot of development of different kinds of prototypical plans, from 4 units, 5 units, 6 units, up to 8 units that have suites. And so as part of that work, and as plans are adopted, that's something that we'd hope to integrate in the process to, again, streamline and reduce cost, reduce time, and ultimately reduce risk to especially first-time developers. So with that, I think we will go into some Q&As. So if anybody has any Q&As, feel free to type them in the chat here, and I'll read them out loud, and we can answer them to the best of our abilities.
I can get us started with the simple question. What advice would you give to someone new to development?
Dar, do you want me to tackle that?
Yeah, for me, I would say maybe I'll start, Al, and then you can add on. Is my advice for a new developer would be not to be adventurous. Do something that has reduced risk, try it for the first time, and continue to improve and iterate for your future projects. So I don't know if, Al, you probably have a lot more to say about this, but for me, it's really just risk mitigation and understanding the best way to optimize success versus trying to do something that's never been done before and increasing your risk in the project.
Yeah, you know what? It's such a fine balance. So 2 things. One, I would say, like, we use the term like not getting over your skis quite often because it's easier to think about doing larger projects. And folks always think bigger is better as you kind of get momentum. And I think that's more relevant for once you're kind of like starting to kind of get the pace of things. What I would say is like someone starting off though is like you have to take that first leap of faith. And if there was no risk and it was guaranteed, then everybody would be doing it. And so as scary as it may appear, you have to actually at some point pull the trigger, get on the saddle and be prepared to go on that ride. And so my advice to those who are looking, the first step is like, how do you find the right site and just be due diligent about owning the right site? And again, the beauty of middle housing is like you can purchase a home and rent it and wait patiently for when the timing is aligned or you feel good about the process or the due diligence that you've done. And so, my whole thing is like you can't do enough in terms of like underwriting to ensure your deal's right. But the first step is just owning the right property. And if you have the right property, the second step is obviously assembling the right team. And so maybe I'll go into kind of Hafiz's question because that's kind of what he's asking is if you have the right property, what's the first step? And so for me, the first step is kind of what we talked about in middle school is like, if there was no constraints, if there was no concerns, Hafiz, I would first ask myself is like, what do I want to achieve? Like, what is your goal? Is this for you? Is it for your family? Is it for you to be a rental project? And then the next step, once you kind of figure out that, is like going through the due diligence, right? Like what can your lot actually allow for? What are the costs to build something like that? And so I know you and I have been talking a little bit about the Middle Forum group. This is kind of why we've created that, is to kind of help folks venture through. So, you want to get a consultant, you want to do a test fit, and then you want to have an idea of what it costs to build. Those are probably some of the most imperative things that you want to find out early is what can my site allow for? How much is it going to cost me to build it? How much money do I need to do it? Are probably the first three things that you want to tackle. Dar, I don't know if you think I missed anything there, but those that's where I would start at these.
Yeah, and I think naturally with the due diligence process, you'll want to make sure that the lot that you have has the proper zoning for your project vision. So say you wanted to develop a sixplex, but you're in a neighborhood that only allows singles or duplexes. That regulation has changed, as many of you probably know, in the Calgary context, but I'm just mentioning it for the folks on the line who are not within Calgary. And then, of course, just like making sure that at least at a high level, your project pencils. So it's great if all of these things, like you get the cost from the contractor and everything hits the due diligence. But if you're developing in an area where there's no appetite to buy these units or to be able to rent these units, the project ultimately won't be viable for you. So again, everybody's vision and everybody's needs and desires for the lots are different. Understanding what those particular things are, like, does it have to be viable? Maybe you're a not-for-profit housing provider and you don't require the cash flow on the project. So all of these things, like, added together, they need to be considered together and not in isolation.
Nia, good to see you. So Middle Modular Project, where we just started to deploy, we went through all the logistics, through a bunch of the underwriting for that deal. As you can imagine, I know you've been working through modular as well. Like, the levels of complexity that arise through this process has been interesting. Like, every turn, there seems to be something new that we weren't aware of, no matter how much due diligence we've done. And so what I would say is, like, every time we feel closer, we're further away. But that being said, I think like the goal is to have the groundwork started this fall at some point, and then probably completion into the spring, and mostly to do around permitting. We are working with the team at ACO to support them on their show suite, which should be done earlier and will be delivered to ACO Park. So that should be delivered hopefully in the fall is the goal, fingers crossed. But yeah, lots happening on that front.
Yeah, and just to provide some background on the modular, the modular pilot project, this project is, I think, kind of the first of its kind in developing a modular typology that can be scaled across established lots across different jurisdictions. And so, like Al mentioned, this particular project is for ATCO. We're also working with other modular manufacturers. For example, in the city of Kelowna, we help them to develop their fast track program that pre-approved 10 different design typologies. And so if you came into the city and you applied with this particular design, the city would turn around your building permit within 10 days. And as part of those design typologies, one of them, again with SRI homes, is considered modular ready. So components of that development could be modular, and that's readily available as soon as today. Awesome. So I'll just see if, okay, so I'm going to go back to Khalad, which is, at what point do a newbie need licensing as a developer, or do we not need that for now? So my response to that is you don't need to be licensed as a developer. I don't know, Al, if you had any specific things to add related to this, but like Al and I mentioned, there's no real school for how to be a developer and get a professional accreditation. A lot of the folks that are in the land development space are developers because of their natural progression in learning all of the different facets that go into the land development process, and then they became a developer by doing projects. Anything to add, Al?
Yeah, I think you need a business license, like any business license. You don't actually require any contractor licensing. However, if you're going to self-perform, there are some additional levels of licensing and insurance that are required when you're, self-performing, constructing yourself. Most importantly, the one thing that we always ask all of our contractors to have is we want new home warranty. Even though you can have an exemption for purpose-built rental housing, we still require it because it's the one thing that keeps contractors honest in terms of their obligation to ensure that the houses don't not get finished the way that you expect them to. So one thing I would flag for all of you is if you're going to work with a contractor, even though they may not need new home warranty, you still pay for it and make them require it. Maybe jumping into the next question here from Gustav. So in terms of financial institutions, I would say there's two sets of capital that are required for your capital stack. There's debt financing. Most of what Darlene and I will talk about is the CMHC program. If you've attended middle school or seen some of our language, which funds 95% loan to cost of these projects, because they're purpose-built rental, they have a certain level of affordability requirements. And so CMHC doesn't actually give you the money. They give you a certificate of insurance, which you then take to a debt provider to actually issue the loan. Generally speaking, debt providers were excited to provide those loans because they are backed by the federal government. However, we've been seeing pushback on these smaller loan projects, first-time folks who are doing this. Again, another reason why Dar and I created Middle to support folks through that process of being able to access that mechanism. There's a covenant requirement, there's a guarantee requirement, net worth, liquidity, and I won't go through all those in detail, but those are some of the things that are important when you're going through this process of trying to get debt financing. The second part of the capital stack, I would say, is your equity. And for equity, generally speaking, if you don't have enough money to do this by yourself, when I got started, I went to friends and family. It's the natural place you turn to try to get access to capital to help you do a project. We are exploring other avenues. You may have seen some of our posts with a company called Addy. They are out of Vancouver. They're a crowdsourcing platform. We're going to be doing hopefully a pilot project, a demonstration project with them where we're going to actually crowdsource raise some of the equity requirement and do a partnership. And so again, our goal would be to, if folks are part of our development advisory services, they've come through middle school, they're part of the middle community, that we would find a way to actually figure out how to fill people's capital stack or covenant requirement. And so if I was to advise you on raising funding today, my answer would be friends and family are probably the best place to go. Outside of that, if we can make the progress and hope to be where we're at, we're hoping that eventually we can help support folks like you who, are a part of our community, a part of our forum, and we're helping to kind of risk mitigate the odds of failure.
And thank you, Nia, for sharing the Addy Invest website there for those of you that are unfamiliar with Addy. I think I'll hop on to the next question. To what degree do you pursue architectural initiatives in middle housing? Can you comment on how your projects differ from housing as a commodity? And maybe just because we have like a lot of very specific experiences in the round square space, and particularly how it's won local, national, and international awards. I'll pass it back to you to speak on that.
Yeah, so Noah, like I've spent my life trying to figure out how to make architecture more accessible. Like, how can we make design more accessible to the people? And it's hard. Like, no matter what architect I've met with, no matter what builder I've met with, I can't seem to figure out a way to do it in a cost-effective manner, even though that's the promise. And so it's a sad reality, but it's one that like I've learned painfully time and time again. And I wouldn't tell you that I've given up on that. What I would tell you though is I've like started to take over control of that kind of realm in my own, like as a developer, as someone who cares about city building, though, I've kind of started to try to lead that direction myself a bit more in terms of what are the things that I think are important, that I feel like the community thinks are important. And honestly, it's kind of what we're leading with middle is like, we think the public realm is important. We think greenscaping is important. We think planning in terms of like how you use your space is important. But what I would say to you is like, so if you're a developer, you're doing this for the first time, you don't need to blow it out of the park architecturally. Like that's one of those first mistakes that we all make, because we all dream about doing things and then we get suckered into RFPs and details and cost overruns and requests for more information, which kill you on contracts when you're going through the construction process. So high level, I would just say like, there is a place for architecture. A lot of the pre-approved plan stuff that we're working with now is to really help solve that problem. It's to democratize good design, but also create predictability for everyone in the ecosystem, including communities. In terms of like high level square footage prices, I think it's one of the most like dangerous conversations we can have, because there's such a range. Are you self-performing? What region are you in? What kind of structure are you building? And so it's just one that I think is so hard. And I've heard costs vary anywhere from like down to like 190 a square foot all the way up to 300 a square foot. And then it depends if you're above grade, below grade. Like, so I think it's so hard to speak at a per square foot level, just because the range and jurisdictionally we're seeing costs kind of fluctuate so much. Dara, I don't know if you had anything specific to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say that I think, Jacob, you attended middle school. Thanks for doing that. In some of our presentation materials that we distributed in the construction slides done by Calamar, I think that they did put a ballpark figure of what kinds of costs that they're seeing between like their lower level versus their higher level designs. I think somewhere in the middle of that was about 265, but like Al said, it would really vary based on your design, based on finishes, based on jurisdictional context. Calamar does, I don't know if you could speak to this, Al, but like hundreds and hundreds of townhomes per year, and they have a pretty good idea of their pricing. But again, it's based on their trades, their relationships, and all sorts of other factors that need to be considered.
Sorry, that was Noah, but I'm going to jump to Jacob's question here. No worries. Yeah. Jacob, a duplex versus a townhome is a question for a sale project. Again, so back to like the vision, like you kind of have to set what your objectives are. So, if your objective is to build something, at what price point to serve what part of the market, I think is the first real question. Because duplexes, generally speaking, are probably going to be closer to $1 million, if not over $1 million at this point. I think over, most likely, depending on the neighborhood that you choose and the land basis. The 4s and the 5s are not going to be that expensive. And there's very little that's selling in the available in that marketplace. Like, I haven't seen a lot of new row houses sell because everyone's going rental. The biggest difference I would say to you is like stormwater management requirements will show up, fire rating suppressions will show up. and just general build form and complexities will slightly change. And so those are probably the things that you're going to want to be prepared to deal with is stormwater management. Is there a zoning change that's required? And then what is the fire separation requirements that you're going to run into when you go to larger than 2 units? So high level, I would say those are going to be your biggest challenges.
Yeah, and I have a little bit of background noise here, but what I would just add to that is, again, like depending on what your vision is, the market that you're building in, and also, you know, what is the market for a duplex at $1 million each, or maybe it's like 1.5 these days, depending on the community, versus doing something like a 4-plex or a 5-plex that qualifies for MLI Select financing that allows you to have access to cheaper lending rates and so forth. So again, it's a balancing act between like your vision, what's allowed, what is the viability of the project, but ultimately it really, your no-go lands at your product viability. And so that's obviously going to be one of your top considerations.
Cool. Jumping into Hafiz's next question, kind of like everything is ready to go and they need someone to help them kind of take the lead and help them through the process. And so maybe I'll just talk a little bit about our development forum group here, just because I think like we're still in the process of figuring out our model post middle school, just being fully transparent, because there's been so many people that have approached us to manage their projects, deliver their projects, partner with them. And we're just trying to figure out how do we take our skill set and make sure we can apply it to a bunch of folks like yourself to become developers. And so we kind of developed the development forum group as an opportunity for peer-to-peer learning. So putting together a group of people and then centering them around kind of one of our expert team members. And so Hafiz, like what I would say to you is like the development forum group is like the perfect place for what you're talking about. High level, like we're thinking today we're charging $1,500 a month for that service, and so that's going to get you, you know, a one-to-one meeting. It's going to get you a group meeting. It's going to be able to answer a lot of these early questions that folks are kind of going through. And what I keep telling everyone is like, you know, $1,500 a month over the course of 12 months is a significantly less money than you're probably going to spend trying to do this on your own. And so Dar and I basically said anyone can drop out at any month that they feel like we're not providing value. For those of you that have taken middle school, we're going to credit you the middle school towards the first forum group because we just think that it's such an incredible opportunity. And so I would say to you, that's for us, that this thing is like so underpriced, but we know that we can create an enormous amount of value. And if we can't, like there's no having to stay in. And our hope is like we can stay in with the project for some time as we kind of help you through all the emerging things that always seem to show up when you least expect it. So that's kind of what the middle forum group is. Hafiz, we have about 5 people that are hoping to start with us here come kind of September 1st. You know, we could probably kick off earlier, but we've just been lining up, signing those contracts with some folks. And again, I just think if we can get a group of people who are close, who are going to be moving on their projects, there's an opportunity for peer-to-peer learnings about how things are going for others on their project. And so that's kind of the goal. And if you want to start Hafiz, just, yeah, we'll obviously get you signed up and get you rolling. So.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to what Al mentioned is that development management fees or joining our development forum group are fees that are actually considered soft costs under your development management fee. And this kind of ties into the next question that Nia asked is, for your own projects, are you penciling your own 5% project management fees? And I would say, yes, 5% is about standard. I think that there's some folks that offer it for a little bit less, and there's some folks that offer it for more. If you consider the value of, what was it, $1,500 per month on like a $300 or a $3 million project, that works out to, I'm not doing the math correctly, but it's going to be like 2%, I think, of your project cost, and you'd be able to keep that 3% for your development management fees, just for math. And so, sorry, just going back to my earlier thought is that because these are soft costs, when you go into finance with CMHC, and Al, you can describe this more eloquently than I can, is you can get those costs reimbursed monthly in your financial draws.
Yeah, and so what I would add is like Yeah, it's a development management fee, similar to project management fee, and CMHC does allow for you to put 5% into your project so long as the costs are supported all set. So if you're becoming your own development manager, as Dar said, we see us being a marginal fee, but also training you to be a good development manager and ensure your project has success. And then, as I mentioned, we're working with some other financial tools. Middle is hoping to launch what we're calling a covenant fund. And so let's assume, you have your project, but you're short, you don't meet the liquidity requirements, you don't meet the net worth requirements. We don't want that to be the reason that your project stops. And so we're putting together some capital right now to support certain folks who are all the way down the pipeline, but are stuck because of that one hurdle, to figure out how we can help them get over that challenge. I'll quickly just speak to Gustavo. I think we're interested in all different types of construction innovation. What I would probably just say to you is that, like, we're trying to enable folks who have never done this before. And so for me, my whole thing is, like, if I am your advisor, I'm trying to de-risk this as much as possible. And so when we talk about innovation in architecture, and I mean, everyone's asked me about this, like, oh, you're doing modular, I'd love to do that, I want to do this flat ship. It's like, I want to do all those things, but, like, for us to serve our customers and folks in middle school the best, what I want to do is I want a proven model, and I want to see them have success. And so we don't want anyone to have to go through any kind of, like, innovation risk when we don't feel that there's certainty around those things today. And I would tell you is, like, we're not experts in a lot of these things, even modular. Dar and I have been drinking through a fire hose over the last 6 months, and as excited as I am about it, it's not something that I would want any of you to venture down today unless you have more expertise than we do when it comes to that, just because I still think there's some kinks that need to be ironed out. But when you're talking about policy, conventional construction, all those things, like, we feel really confident about some of the systems and processes that we've discovered that we think we can help educate and share.
So Hafiz asked, should I call the city to ask what is applicable on our property? And so I would say that I think that you're able to use the chat system with the city planning folks, and they'll be able to describe this to you. But I'll also mention that on the middle community, which I guess all of you would be registered in because you're in this Q&A session with us, we do have some resources that may be valuable to you. So if you go to, is it resources and tools section, we have a section that says, how do you find what your zoning is? I think the city of Calgary is listed there. And it's as simple as typing in your address. It zooms into your particular address. You click you click it, and the information box pops up. And on the side with the information box, it'll tell you what your specific zoning is for your property. And I think it also even maybe links you to the land use bylaw. So then you go to the land use bylaw, search that particular district that your property is in, and it would specifically outline what is possible on your property. There are sometimes some more technical bits there that may require some interpretation from folks that are versed in reading land use bylaws, like your designer, for example. But otherwise, in terms of understanding what form and what density, you should be able to navigate that.
Maybe if there's, like, oh, sorry, no, I saw your question there. Yeah, so the GIS is, like, really, really close. Again, if you attended middle school, you would have saw us kind of do a quick teaser of that. And the whole reason why we created it is we wanted an easier way to do exactly what Hafiz is asking, is if you were to kind of put in your property, could we tell you with certainty what you could do on that property to the best of our ability? And so I've been using the city maps for some time. Yeah, Dar has it here. So I was going to say, maybe for fun, we could test it. Hafiz, can you type in your address and we'll just type it in?
Sorry, Al, this one is actually our Figma version. So
okay, never mind.
But I'll show you how this typically works. So you would enter in your address here. You'd see the results. It would show you exactly where your lot is. On our actual working version, this was our earlier prototype, but our working version allows you to, like, actually scan different lots and select different lots, and it'll tell you the information. But really the intention is your lot is highlighted here. It provides you some details on what different aspects of your lot, from what is the zoning, property value, the community you're in, lot parameters. It also has a measuring tool to allow you to measure what your lot dimensions are, though the City of Calgary also has that information. And then it would tell you, based on some of the design inventory that we have, what types of designs are suitable or not suitable for this particular property. So the intention into the future, which I'm when I say future, I'm hoping like the 1 to 2 month period, is you'd click this and you would see what plans are available for your property and ways to proceed. So 4x4, the 2x4, and then it tells you which forms are not possible on your property. And then finally, in addition to that, we have the reasons why it would be suitable and the reasons why it would not be suitable.
So Jacob, just real quick, I'll answer this. The intent of the program is to produce more affordable rental housing. It's not meant to produce sale units. However, what we are starting to see is folks who are building the 8 units and then selling them outright as the entirety. When you purchase them, you actually have to take on all of the affordability requirements and keep them as rental. And so you'd have to have a buyer that could buy them and then retain all of the affordability requirements that come with the property that they got access to financing, because there's a 10-year affordability requirement on part of the units. And so CMHC programs today, aside from a co-op one, but I don't even know the details on that model, is primarily, from our experience, been rental focused.
And Mia, just to respond to your question about GIS, at the moment, we're prototyping for Calgary, but the intention is once we nail this program, we're going to bring it across to other fast track jurisdictions that we're working with.
Hafiz typed in his address into the channel. I just wonder if we did a quick, just like pull it up on Google and kind of show him some of the high flags that we would see, just to give people an understanding of what that might look like for us. I have it here. I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, it's looks like a screen on the right of end stream.
See if this works. You're going to see all my entire screen. So you guys tell me if you can see this. Is that better? So yeah, Hafiz, he put in his address in the chat. He's located in an established area. He's in Temple. So again, as soon as I put one of these in, usually, generally speaking, I'm looking for proximities. First thing I do would look at is, does the site actually meet the applicable requirements? What is the size of the site? And so I already know Hafiz's site is a 50 by 120. I want to make sure it's lane loaded, so you can see that he's got a lane on both sides here. Then I go into the context of the site. So what would this be considered? Temple Drive is a corridor. Calgary recently changed its policy for established neighborhoods and how it would be defined. And so does this meet the definition of an established neighborhood? And again, I've talked to Hafiz a little bit. He's in what's considered an outer kind of established neighborhood. And so the biggest difference is, although he is now RCG as of right, the current parking requirements are 1-to-1 versus 0.5, I believe, from what we've looked at. You're in these kind of outer ring established neighborhoods, you are 0.5 if you're within a major transit route. I think these are rapid BRTs, but that would be the first thing I would do, is check if there's rapid BRT and what that means. And then I'd go into like specifics about the site. Like I would try to look at what are the nuances, right? So this is good. The trees in the boulevard, you won't have a tree fee. The site looks relatively flat. There's no fire hydrant. I already know that it's 50 by 120. I would then kind of look like this, like where are the power lines? It's great. Power lines are on the opposite side of the street. And then I'll follow this with a site visit once I've identified a site that makes sense. And so, pretty standard here in terms of the lane, like really good condition. Lane is paved. That's great. And so that's what I typically would go through when I'm looking at a first sight, at a very cursory overview, is like, where does this sit in situation based on policy? But then also, if you're going to go through a rezoning process, how does it fit in terms of what else is around there? And so, like, again, you can see there's townhomes, multifamily in and around here. He's across from a lane. I feel like this, right here, he's got a daycare on the corner. So some really good art, some really good signs for what could be rezoned, and probably wouldn't face a bunch of opposition if he was to build some units there that was middle housing orientated. And so that's kind of like cursory, high level. What I would look at when going through that process. And then from there, we would go in deeper, start doing a test on the unit fits. Understanding what the land basis cost is. A corner unit wouldn't fit there because that lane is not considered a street, so you couldn't do a row house. You'd have to kind of do a front back. And so that's kind of some of the stuff that we'll be doing in kind of the middle forum group as well. It's like just going through that identification process and giving people some good information about what the next steps are, what the process looks like.
One resource that I'll also point to is within the community. Again, there's a resources section that might be helpful in identifying some of these things, but I'll also point to the middle playbook, which will have specific sections that speak to the due diligence of a project. And if there's anything as you go through, if you're in community and you go through a particular chapter and you're like, oh, this is great, but they didn't touch on this chapter, we'd love for you to comment specifically on that chapter, and we'll continue to build on the resources that we have available. Maybe Al, because I see that Noah was it Noah? Sorry, I want to triple check names now because I got it wrong twice. On another office hours day, would love to hear about both of your histories. Maybe I'll just, since as we're waiting for questions, we can talk about that a little bit. So I'll kick off. My background is Al mentioned earlier, but it's in urban planning. So I did my bachelor's degree in urban planning. I did my master's degree in urban planning. I worked in different municipalities, and then I also worked in planning consultancies, particularly for doing work for developers. That's actually how I met Al once upon a time in a past life. And then following my work at a planning consultancy, I was the vice president of development for Basecamp Resorts. And so I essentially created their their real estate division, where they hadn't had one prior to my coming there. And at one point during my work at Basecamp, I was managing a portfolio, an active land development portfolio of $450 million worth of real estate at all different stages of the land development process. I've also been investing in real estate over the last 8 years, and I have experience working, or I sat on the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board and the Planning Commission for the town of Canmore. What else can I say? I think that's it. And then Al, maybe I'll pass it off to you.
Yeah, so I mean, some of you have heard my story, I'm sure, but I grew up in the Northeast, born and raised in Calgary. Hafiz and I actually went to elementary together, but I grew up in Temple as well, so I know the community quite well. I got my real estate license right out of high school, graduated from Lester B. Pearson, and then while I had my real estate license, I went to university. I got a business degree from Haskayne, and that was great. But I was so keen to kind of get out and to try to start. And so I did very little real estate. Like, I never really sold much. I sat a bunch of open houses and got paid cash to do so because realtors hate sitting open houses. But I drove all over the city, put out signs like in every community, and kind of just got an understanding of what was happening. And so I bought some places, tried to do some deals, lost money everywhere. And you kind of learn through those processes. Like, if you're going to lose money, as long as you're learning, I think it's okay and can afford to be learning. But every time I did that, there was a step up and kind of work through my process. And so I eventually met my wife, who was an architect. My brother was building houses and said I wanted to kind of figure out doing inner city stuff. And we did a really crappy project. And then she kind of showed how we don't have to do crappy projects. And kind of the rest has been history from there. And I've been chasing kind of like, making sure the work that we're doing is meaningful the whole time. So started kind of doing infill, high end, under beyond homes. Started Round Square to figure out how to actually create more housing for folks within the established neighborhoods, and then create a middle to figure out how to help others kind of solve that problem as well. Is I think like that's the biggest thing missing here in our industry is we don't have enough people building within the established neighborhoods. And if we can help create a movement of different developers, and give people the resource that I never had and Dar never had to make sure they feel confident in the process is kind of what our goals is now, similar to what I said before. So that's it.
So Jacob, in the schematic design and design development process, can you speak to your experience working with a designer versus an architect? 5+ units requires an architect looking at the investment costs and the necessity for one versus the other type of service. So yeah, I could say that I've worked with both designers and architects. It really depends on your preferences and the relationships and with the folks that you know in the industry. I can't say that we maybe prefer one or the other. We have lots of good relationships with both designers and architects. In terms of price point, I can't really recall off the top of my mind if one is a lot more expensive versus the other. Al, would you know that? Maybe it could be like $20,000 or $20,000 less at maximum, maybe. It really depends.
Yeah.
There's that charge less, and there's some designers that charge more. I would also just mention, I know that you're asking this question from a Calgary context, but in the province of BC, if we have any BC folks on the line here, it is the same actually in BC. I was thinking about structural mechanical is not necessarily required on the 4+ units. So sorry, back to you, Al.
Yeah, so I've generally used architects always. Because because this space has been pushing closer and closer to multifamily requirements. And so when you're having to have mechanical, electrical, and fire separation, someone has to be able to coordinate all that. And I just haven't had success in finding a designer that has done that really, really well. So for the most part, I would say that my experiences have always been with an architect. And not to say that there's no reason why you couldn't go with a designer, but again, thinking about risk mitigation and a proven process, I think that would be where we would lean ourselves to. What I would say is we are working on pre-approved schematic plans, building permit plans in multiple municipalities. And so if you're looking to do something that's been pre-approved, you don't need to now pay an architect to actually put that pre-approved plan on the actual parcel. And so our envision was that the cost to buy those plans would go down substantially. And then you're really just paying someone to take the site and plop it, do the site formatting, and the city would have already pre-approved it so long as it fits, that you'd be well on your way for changing colors or whatever. A designer would be more than capable to do that. Even some of the internal, if they weren't changing too fundamentally, that whole process of pre-approved plans is meant to kind of reduce the costs and barrier to entry for folks.
Yeah, and what I would say, Jacob, I know you said 5,000 versus 20,000 in your experience, would also just highly depend on the form. If you were looking at a duplex versus a 4-plex versus a 6-plex versus an 8-plex. Some of the architects that we've worked with charge on a per door basis, and something like sometimes $10,000 a door, but that would also include the suite below. So if you're looking at an 8-plex, it could be something like $40,000 as a ballpark. And then again, it could be a lot cheaper than that if you work with certain other architects or other designers. Someone starting out and wanting to get into development, would you suggest their first project to be single or duplex infill units to gain experience before moving into building multiple units such as 4 to 8 plexes that might be more complicated? You know, I couldn't, maybe I'll pass this off to you just because I haven't dabbled in too many singles and duplexes. I would say that generally the land development process is the same, whether it's a single, just you would follow the same processes going all the way. It's really just a matter of who you bring on the team, their familiarity with the building form that you're working with, and then also just being able to understand financing mechanisms and the pro forma for both. But for me, I would say that the project that makes most sense is the one that's viable. So if you're a first-time developer and you want to build a single family home or a duplex, but the market isn't there for a single family or duplex, then you're not really setting yourself up for success as a first-time developer. So Al, maybe I'll pass it to you.
It's a good question. I mean, historically, you always start small, right? So like starting that renovation, starting that single family, starting that duplex is the natural transition that folks make. What I would say to you is the market. It depends on the market that you're in, first and foremost. But the second thing I would say is like the market in Calgary is shifting. The market in many municipalities across Canada is shifting. And so like I always thought it was easier to build a single family home but I'm going through a process right now where it's like the customers demand higher, the skill set of the trades require more management. You're designing a product that's most likely going to have to be sold. And when you're selling someone's dream home, like obviously, or their first home, or they're making that significant investment, you have to be very sensitive to that process and what people's expectations are. And you have to create alignment. And so my advice to everyone is like, there's a way to do it. And to take advantage of this financing is something that I would encourage all folks to do. If you can figure, if you have enough money to build a single family home or a duplex, that means you probably have enough money to do a purpose-built rental project. And so my feeling would probably, again, personal feeling would be do a middle housing project. But again, it just goes back to your vision and your goals. So like you're building a home for yourself and you want to sell the other side, then a duplex can make a lot of good sense. And Tyson, I know you're a realtor. And so for me also, I just keep thinking about income generation. Like building a home with a suite is probably really smart, even if you're not planning to rent it out, but you might in the future. I just think like if you can differentiate yourself in the product that you're producing, that's probably the best thing to do.